Hello, welcome to Monday and another edition of Sun Dragon Tips and Tricks. I am Rebecca. I am the owner of Sun Dragon Art and Fiber in Brevard, North Carolina. And yes, since this Monday, it is time for me to film from my house. Another fun thing to help you out, right? I thought today I would expand upon our knowledge of how to cast on in knitting. I'm pretty sure in the length of videos I've made, part of the Learning to Knit series was the long tail cast on, which is my favorite way to cast on. About 90% of the time I am doing that, or I'm doing German twisted cast on, which is a little bit like the long tail. That might be next week. Hang on. But today I thought we would talk about both the knitted and the cable cast on. And they are very, very similar. There's just a little bit of a difference between the two. And so I thought I'd put them in one video. And this is great if you don't want to play what we call yarn chicken with long tail cast on. Long tail cast on, you need enough of a tail to not run out by the time you're done. Knitted and cable cast on, you are building as you go, so you don't need a super long tail. That's one of the benefits of it. It's got a nice edge to it usually, and I like it when I've got color changing yarn and I want the edge to not necessarily have two colors competing with each other, which is what can happen with long tail. Long story long, let's get to it and check it out, shall we? The knit and cable cast on only have some very minor differences between them. So let's start with the knit cast on, which once you know the knit stitch, this can be a very easy cast on where you don't have to worry about measuring your tail. So the knit cast on we will talk about first. You're going to start with a slip knot on your left needle. With long tail we have put a slip knot on the right needle. I would add to what I've drawn here, you want a tail that's about 6 inches long. I always want to have a little bit of a tail that's at least long enough to weave it in later. If it's shorter than 6 inches, you may have issues with that. Then what you're going to do is you're going to do what I call 3/4 of a knit stitch. For me, the knit stitch has 4 steps. Write them over here so we can see them. So one is you go in to the stitch. We'll review these in a second. Number 2 is you wrap around. 3 is you pull forward. And 4, when we're doing the whole stitch, 4 is slide off. And it's sliding off the left-hand needle. But in the knit cast on, you don't do that part. You don't slide it off the left-hand needle. You go in, wrap around, pull forward. Once you do that, you're going to place the loop you formed on the right needle in, wrap around, pull forward. There's a loop on this one. You're going to put it back on the left-hand needle. You can do this straight or twisted. You can kind of put it straight on, or you can twist it before you stick it on. I just say be consistent. Do the same thing every single time. Then to me it doesn't really matter. I think I do twist them, but either way will work. And you're going to repeat that. Repeat from the start. Do 3/4 of a stitch. Before you, instead of sliding it off, you're gonna, the loop you've been working the whole time on your left-hand needle, you're gonna add the one you formed on the right onto the left. Don't worry if this is sounding crazy. Watching me do it or watching me draw it out may help. Before we do that though, let's talk about the cable cast on. The cable one starts the same way as the knit one. You have a slip knot. You're going to have to do 3/4 of a knit stitch and add it on to get 2 loops. Once you have 2 stitches, on the left needle, you're going to change things just a little bit. You are still going to do 3/4 of the knit stitch, but you're going to go between the 2 stitches, the last 2 stitches. The ones that are closest, I'm adding clarifying, hopefully not confusing information, closest to needle tip, you're going to go between the 2 instead of only into the front loop, which is what you do with a knit stitch. So let's take a look at how this actually visually looks. So this is doing a knit cast on. The 3/4 of the stitch and then adding it on. So 1, you stick your needle in. Let's color code this a little bit like I like to do. So we will make, let's see, the first stitch that is here is going to be orange so we can keep track of it. The second stitch, which is the stitch that we are going into, I'm going to make my nice purple. And it has 2 strands that hang down. And the working yarn that's going to become our added stitch, I'm going to make blue. So, for step 1, we have gone into front loop. The front side of this stitch. It's how you would normally do a knit stitch. You go in from front to back, just into that front loop of that stitch. Step 2, to get us ready, we're going to have to take, the next step is to take our working yarn and wrap around. This is step 2. What we've done here is we've wrapped the yarn around the right hand needle, or what I like to call the working needle, the one that's doing the pushing and pulling, is your right hand needle. So let's see what that looks like with the colors. Our first stitch, nothing's really going to happen to it. Our second stitch is still hanging out where it's been, with our needle pushed into it. And the working yarn has now been wrapped around only the back needle. Counterclockwise motion, around and between, if you remember from our beginning knitting series. Now, to preview what's going to happen on our next stitch, on step 3, this needle has to pull back forward, and that's pictured here. The needle is pulling the yarn over up there, back under to the front. So if you look at this picture, our first stitch is still just hanging out there. Our second stitch is not quite as visible because we've pulled our needle back to the front. The one that went in is pulled back to the front, and it has pulled a loop of that working yarn forward. It's still back there too, but it's been pulled forward. Now, if we were doing a regular knit stitch, the next step would be to slide this off, but we're not doing step number 4. We're not doing that. Instead, we're taking this blue loop, and if you need to, pull a little more slack so you can get it over and onto the right hand needle. I'm going to call this the end instead of the step 4 because that's a knitting step that I just said we're not doing. 3/4 of the stitch. So what is happening here that colors might help us with? Again, that first stitch, Yeah, nothing's happening to it. Our second stitch here, it's still on the left needle, excuse me. I have not taken it off. Doing a knit row, this would be different. Doing a cast on, keep everything where it is. The loop that I pulled through, that came through just the front side of this stitch, I want to transfer from the right needle back to the left. Once I do that and I pull my right needle out, I will have 3 stitches. The orange, the purple, and the blue all on my left needle, and I'll repeat that again. I would stick my right hand needle into the front part of that blue stitch, wrap around, pull under, and stick the new loop formed on the edge of that left hand needle. Now let's see how the cable cast on is different, because if you can do the knit cast on, you can do the cable cast on. I think the cable cast on has a little bit more strength. It has a little bit more of a decorative quality to it. So let's see. So I'm going to be moving back and forth to compare these a little bit. If we compare the beginning of the knit stitch, we were going into only the front part of the loop. If we look at the cable cast on, we are going in between those loops. I'm not catching any part of this. I'm going directly between them. So let's color code it. We have our orange first stitch. We have our purple second stitch. Here's the difference. This needle goes between the stitches. Up above, it went into the front loop. Here it is going between. But everything else functions pretty much the same. On step 2, we've got our orange guy. We've got our purple guy. And the blue, which down here again was the working yarn, I've wrapped him around in between the needles. So he ends up getting wrapped around just like the knit stitch, around the working needle. So step 2 is really the same. Once the needles have taken their new position, you're wrapping around just like on a knit cast on. Once again, you're backing out the way you came in on step 3. You can think about it as reversing course. You might have a slightly different motion than when you're doing the knit stitch, but you are backing out the way you came in, which in theory is exactly what happens with the knit stitch. You just came at a slightly different angle, in or between. Don't overthink it. Back out the way you came in. It means this loop gets pulled to the front. And then the end of it is the same as above. You are taking the loop you've pulled and you're getting it back on the other needle. So again, orange guy's just been hanging out. In many ways, our purple guy's just hanging out too. All this happened in between them. The biggest difference I'd like to point out on the last picture for both the knit and the cable, is down here. Both strands, this whole stitch is coming from between these two stitches, whereas up above, this blue stitch was coming from between the strands of the purple. That's why I think the cable cast on will have more stability. It's coming from, it's wrapping around both ends of this purple. Again, if it's too much information, don't worry about it. Just know that they're very similar. There's just a little bit of difference of going in and coming out. The knit cast on and the cable cast on. Let's see what it looks like with real yarn. So the knit cast on and the cable cast on start exactly the same way. Slip knot on your needle. If you want a reminder of how to do a slip knot, I hold the tail. Remember, we only need about 6 inches, but we need at least 6 inches. I hold the tail in my hand facing me. I'm going to take the back end, the working yarn, wrap it around my hand, kind of cross over the first loop I made. I'm going to duck it under the loop that's on my left hand and pinch it with my right with my little bit of dry erase marker. Take my left hand out, pull the tail. I've got a slip knot. I'm going to put it on my left hand needle and cinch it up. Snug, not tight, so this isn't too hard to do. Knitted cast on. Treat it like a knit stitch. We're going to go in, front to back, just the front loop. Wrap this yarn. Make sure it's not your tail. That will lead to sadness. Wrap your tail around in between the needles. Duck that wrap around back to the front. That's 3/4 of the knit stitch. Don't slide this one off. I'm going to do a twist. I'm going to come all the way over and put it back on to my left hand needle and take my right hand needle out. I've got 2 stitches now. Going to do it again. Into the front loop only. Take a look at that. That's step 1. Wrap around is step 2. Duck back under to the front. Go out the way you came in is step 3. And then I'm going to slide it back on. New step 4. Not a regular knit stitch, step 4. Let's see what it looks like if I don't twist it when I'm putting it on. So again, in front to back, step 1. Wrap around and between is step 2. Duck under to the front is step 3. If I didn't twist it, I'd go straight into the center, step 4. In front to back, just the front loop. Wrap around. Duck under. If I'm putting it on straight, I just go straight in the center and get it on there. As long as you're consistent, they don't look all that much different from each other, do they? With this little twist along the bottom. Now let's take a look at how a cable cast on differs. So again, let it run away. Aha! Holding my tail, wrap around, over to my knuckles, duck under, pinch, take my hand out and pull. Starts the same way. We need a slip knot. And until I have 2 stitches, I can't do this thing that's different about cable. So I have to start the same way and knitted cast on starts. Just the front loop. There's nothing to go between, right? Just the front loop. Wrap around and between. Duck it under. Put it back on. I'm doing that twist again. Now that I have 2, just checking that I wasn't knitting with my tail. Now that I have 2, instead of going in just the front loop, see how that looks on the back, I'm going to go totally between these 2 stitches. So on the even on the back side, I've got strands on either side of my needle. When I went in front to back, I had 2 strands on the left-hand side of my needle. If I go between for the cable cast on, I'm splitting 1 stitch in front, 1 stitch behind. Everything else is very similar though. Wrap around, I'm going to duck straight forward. I'm just reversing the way I came in. And I got a little bit of my yarn stuck there. And then I'm going to put it on. So it's still those 3 steps, but how I start them is different. Instead of going here, I'm going between the 2 stitches that are closest to the tip, wrapping around in between, ducking back out. This can feel a little tighter. Ducking back out the way I came in and putting this on. Be careful of giving it a yank after you do that. That'll make the next one harder, because we want to go between these 2 stitches, wrap around, duck back under, stick it on. Look how much easier this will be because I didn't tighten this up. Between the 2 stitches, wrap around, duck back to the front, put it on. Little tug, but not too much, so I can go between the 2 stitches, wrap around, duck back under, and back to the front. It gives you more of a twisted bottom here, which can be really nice. Thanks for joining us on the adventure of knitted and cable cast on. Like I said, I really like the cable cast on once it gets going, because it just has a little more stability going between the stitches instead of through them. But either one, if the knitted cast on is a little easier because it more resembles a knit stitch, it works really well too. They're both different ways that you can start with when you really don't have to measure your long tail. That's a plus. It also is great if you have a color changing yarn. Your cast on will change consistently with the stitches that are going up on the needle. With a long amount of cast on, like say 300, 400 stitches, I'll probably do the cable cast on or knitted. With any cast on, I recommend using stitch markers about every 10 to 20. Pick a number you're going to remember and it's easy to count, so that you don't have to recount a million times. You can just say, okay, 10, 20, 30, 3 more, and I'm done. I hope you have a really wonderful day. It's looking like it might rain again here. Big surprise, because I live in Brevard. It is not the land of waterfalls, it is the land where waterfalls. I hope there's good weather where you are today. I hope you have a really great day and are able to get some crafting in. And I hope you craft on with joy and confidence. Please consider subscribing to this channel if you haven't already. At least give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Hit that bell once you subscribe. It'll let you know when we have new stuff happening. We shoot for every Monday. And I'll look into maybe a different cast on for next week. If you have things that you'd like us to do in the tips and tricks, please message us, put a comment below, contact the shop. We love you and we miss you. Bye. You missed the filming today, honey. Hi. Yes. Yes. Oh. It's a good kitty, but I touched it in the wrong place, right? It's on your terms. And we're already done. Okay.